This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
Calendars have always been a critical part of the development of civilization. They help us know when everything from meetings at work happen to what day our favorite show premieres. The calendar that the world uses now is the Gregorian calendar. It was a small reform of the Julian calendar, which was used throughout the Roman Empire and later throughout all of medieval Europe. Given how the Western world has been using the same calendar for at least 1,000 years, we hardly even notice it anymore, yet it shapes how we think of time itself. Calendar is one of the longest continuous projects of humanity. Our calendar's origin story goes all the way back to the Egyptians, who were the first to adopt the 365-day year and 12-month format. Each month in the Egyptian calendar was divided into 30 days. Of course, the continual frustration of all calendar makers is immediately clear. 365 refuses to divide evenly, and with a 30-day month, 5 extra days are left over. The Egyptians solved this problem by simply having 5 extra days at the end of their calendar reserved for festivals and just called it good. Unlike the Egyptians, the Romans in the days of the Republic had 12 months of varying amounts of days, the same as we do today. However, their calendar still only added up to 355 days. And the religious officials in Rome had extreme power over the lengths of months and years. People being people, the pontiffs would often use the calendar as a political tool, shortening or lengthening politicians' terms by literally taking and giving days. This calendar fiddling would mess with people's ability to keep the days straight, and added to the issues already present in the Roman calendar. Not only that, but the Romans were really weird in the way they actually discussed dates in day-to-day life. Anyone who has read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar knows that Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March. But what does that actually mean? Romans would count their days based off 3 key dates in every month: the Calendae, the Nones, and the Ides. These 3 dates were used as reference points that were counted forward or backward from in order to represent specific days. The Ides were the middle of each month, and either occurred on the 15th or the 13th, depending on the month. The Nones were on the 5th or the 7th of each month. Calendae was on the 1st day of the month, and that is where we get the word calendar from. Unfortunately, the solar year isn't actually 365 days long. It's 365.2422 days long. This horrible number practically necessitated reform.
Good day, everyone. Julian here for D-News. Have you ever wondered why the calendar is the way it is? I mean, what drove us in the Western world to have a 365-day year? Turns out, it's an interplay between astronomy, religion, and history. The calendar we use right now is the Gregorian calendar, so named because it was implemented by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582. Now, why would the Pope be interested in the calendar? Well, Easter was traditionally supposed to fall on the Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox on March 21st, but it had started slipping later and later behind the solar event. And Gregory was worried that they were missing Christ's rebirth day by about 10 days, so he commissioned Italian scientist Aloysius Lilius to fix it and make sure they were on Jesus' good side. When they made the switch, the Catholic world jumped forward a full 10 days, and you thought daylight savings was bad. Many non-Catholic countries wouldn't adopt the Gregorian calendar for hundreds of years still. Russia switched after their October Revolution in 1917, which under the new system technically began in November. The reason the Gregorian calendar is more accurate with our solar cycle is because it changed how we approached leap years. It still has a leap year every 4 years, like the Julian calendar, except for years that are divisible by 100. Except for years that are divisible by 400. So 2000 was a leap year, but 2100 will not be. Why this wonky system for leap years, though? As it turns out, our revolution around the sun is not a perfect 365 days, but 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds.
On full tilt 365 days a year, psychopath!
Actually, it's 364.
Before Julius Caesar became emperor, the calendar was all over the place, literally being manipulated by the Roman high priests for political reasons. Sometimes years were lengthened to keep allies in office, sometimes they were shortened to kick rivals out quicker. Julius Caesar put a stop to that by standardizing the Julian calendar. Introduced in 45 BCE, or what to the Romans was 709 as they counted years from the founding of the city of Rome, his calendar had 365 days every year with an extra day every 4. It still made the average year length 11 minutes and 14 seconds too long, but that wouldn't be evident until hundreds of years passed. To honor him for reforming the calendar, the Roman Senate changed the name of Caesar's birth month to July. They'd honor him again a year later by murdering him on the infamous Ides of March. I always wondered, if Caesar could change the calendar willy-nilly, why didn't he just get rid of March? Way to drop the ball, Caesar. The reason we're in year 2015, though, and not 2768 is because in 525, Christian monk Dionysius Exiguus determined that Jesus was born in the Roman year 753 and started counting over again from there. Because of him, we get terms like BC, for before Christ, and AD, which does not stand for after death, but actually Anno Domini, which in Latin means the year of our Lord. In the academic and scientific communities, we keep things neutral and welcoming to people of all faiths, so you'll often hear the terms BCE and CE for before Common Era and Common Era. Of course, the Gregorian calendar is far from the only calendar in use around the world today. Many calendars from cultures with less pronounced seasons actually rely on cycles of the moon instead of the sun. But for predicting the changes of seasons, equinoxes, solstices, and when certain constellations will be visible, the Gregorian calendar is the one we prefer for its regularity. At least until 4909, when it'll be a day ahead again.
Note that our modern calendar is a Catholic innovation and that it was established by the Pope. Every year, secular society participates in the Gregorian calendar, established by Pope Gregory XIII in 1586. Its predecessor is the Julian calendar, created by Julius Caesar in the year 46 BC. So what sparked the change? The answer is both practical and liturgical. Errors in the Julian calendar resulted in an 11-minute discrepancy between the annual calendar and the actual solar year. With the Gregorian calendar's modifications, that number gets trimmed to a mere 26-second difference. Liturgically, the challenge was predicting the correct date of Easter Sunday. Pope Gregory's goal in 1586 was to resolve this problem. Inside the church lies a meridian line, where at solar noon, a light shines through a pinhole in the wall and points to the correct date on the sundial. Near Christmas at winter solstice, the light shines furthest away from the wall. During the summer solstice, the light hits the ground at its closest point. And at the vernal equinox, the light lands closer to the middle, and thus we can correctly place the date of Easter on the first Sunday thereafter. The Gregorian calendar hasn't been followed, though, by some Protestant and Orthodox churches, such as initially in England and still in churches in Egypt, Ethiopia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. This is why Orthodox Christmas takes place on January 7th and is predicted to change to January 8th in the year 2101.
A number of calendars in early human history. You had the Hebrew calendar, the Egyptian calendar, the Greek calendar, Chinese calendar, Babylonian calendar, and others. The one we use today in the Western world originated from the Roman calendar. Incidentally, the early Roman calendar evolved from that of the Greeks. It was basically a lunar calendar with an extra month inserted every so often to keep the months in step with the seasons.
In antiquity, Yahuwah established the first and oldest calendar, really at creation. Yes, it matters to him. He created the timekeeper, the sun. Yeah, the moon and the stars have purposes and functions. Indeed, there's no doubting that. They are for signs and seasons as well. They have their functions. However, the measure, the great sign for days, Sabbaths, weeks, months, years, Sabbaths of years, and jubilees, and even seasons. Well, these start for all of these on the sun as the measure, not the moon. Yes, there are a couple of feasts driven by the moon because they are evening events, but we even prove their timelines out in 2 videos in our Sabbath series, parts 1 and 2. It's Answers in Sabbath, parts 1 and 2. One on the unleavening the 7 days of unleavened bread, the other one on the Day of Atonement. So basically, they both identify the day switching at sunrise. Period. Done. Proven. The end. There's really nothing to discuss. See, this is the Bible calendar. Does this matter to Yahuwah? Let's see. Yahuwah cared so much about his calendar, well, he had it engraved on the heavenly tablets, which are still there, by the way, which writing Moses received and wrote Jubilees, and Enoch also reviewed and wrote the book of Enoch. There you go. 52 weeks in the year, 364 days, and the months are essentially 30 days each. And yes, they're 24-hour days. We will deal with that when we get to Enoch. There are some out there saying, oh, it's 18 hours. No. Enoch is charting the sun and the moon from the east gate to the west gate. You're missing the 6 hours that are the return, which is a total of 24. So no, that does not ever work either.
In terms of lunar calendars, though, the one used to decide the date of Easter and the Islamic calendar are the last vestiges of lunar calendars in our society. To explain lunar calendars in short, they are organized into 12 months, where each month starts with the new moon, and the length of the month will be either 29 or 30 days long. The year, just like the old Roman calendar, adds up to either 354 or 355 days. Of course, this causes huge drifts in terms of seasons from year to year, and is why Muslims observe Ramadan, a month-long period of fasting and prayer, at different times of the Gregorian year, depending on how it lines up with the Islamic lunar calendar. Though the calendar is based on scientific phenomenon, like the cycles of the sun and the moon, it is important to remember that the calendar is not natural. At its core, the calendar is a philosophical and cultural invention. It won't tell you what year, month, week, or day it is. It doesn't tell you today is May 3rd. Instead, it just shows you when May 3rd is. Unless you're using Google Calendar, which, let's be honest, you all are. So even though it may have seemed insane to the Roman people, or to Catholic countries in the late 1500s, calendars can be changed. And Pope Gregory XIII did just that. He gathered a group of genius scientists and doctors to try and create the most accurate calendar possible. Eventually, they found a relatively elegant solution. Every year divisible by 4 should be a leap year. Unless the year is also divisible by 100, then it is not a leap year. However, if that year is divisible by 400, then ignore this and it's still a leap year. This reform would mean that instead of drifting by 11 minutes each year, the calendar would drift by only 26 seconds. In order to fix the current date, though, of course, just like in Caesar's time, people would have to suffer with a day change. So in every Catholic country, the day after October 4th, 1582, was October 15th, not October 5th. And also, just like in Rome a millennia and a half earlier, people did not like this. Everything from debt deadlines, to holidays, to birthdays were changed. Even the Pope's birthday changed from January 1st to January 11th. Mobs arose around Europe, angry about their 10 lost days. And many countries did not adapt to this new calendar quickly. England wouldn't use the Gregorian calendar until 1752, and Greece was the last European country to hold out, finally adopting it in 1923. China didn't adopt the Gregorian calendar until 1949. In a strange twist of fate, though, the last major challenge that the calendar would face would not be because it wasn't accurate enough, but because it was too accurate.
And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times, and the dividing of time.
In 46 BCE, Julius Caesar, aided by the astronomer Sosigenes, introduced a new calendar, with 12 months of 30 or 31 days, except for Februarius that had 28. He also kept the names of the months as they were, although 2 years later Emperor Augustus decided to change Quintilius to Julius in honor of his great-uncle, and Sextilius to Augustus in honor of, himself. Caesar's calendar, the Julian calendar, was so accurate and the legacy of the Roman Empire so dominant that Europe continued using it for the next 1,600 years. That is until Pope Gregory encountered his problem from the beginning of this episode. The Julian calendar was based on a year that was exactly 365.25 days long, allowing an extra day to simply drop into Februarius once every 4 years. However, as astronomers had known for at least a century before Caesar cooked up his calendar, the solar year is just a little bit shorter than that. As a result, too many leap years had been added in, and the calendar had drifted off course. This mattered for Pope Gregory and the Catholic Church because in 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea had decreed that the 21st of March would be the point from which Easter was determined. But by 1582, thanks to Caesar's slapdash math, the 21st of March was 4 days out from where it had been at the time of the council's decree. The work to fix this had actually begun 40 years earlier. That's just how long it took mathematicians all across Europe to come up with a solution. But by reducing the number of leap years that would arise over the centuries and removing 10 days from 1582, they did it. And from that work, the Gregorian calendar was born. It's actually so accurate it gains just 1/10 of a day over the course of 400 years, and it's the basis of the international standard that we use today. Though it did take a while for Gregory's calendar to catch on. As you might expect, the Holy Roman Empire was quick to adopt the Pope's new calendar, but the other Christian churches refused to recognize it. It took almost 200 years for Protestant Britain to accept it, and it wasn't until the start of the 20th century that the Orthodox nations of Russia and Eastern Europe adopted what by then had become the international standard.
To lay it all out, we need to start with March, because that was the first month of the calendar in ancient Rome. In Latin, it was called Martius, and it was named for Mars, the god of war, and agriculture. So the motivation may have had something to do with the start of farming season.
April may come from the Latin aperire, meaning to open, a nod to the blossoming flowers of spring. May was named for Maia, a Roman goddess of growth and fertility.
The fourth month was named for the goddess Juno, a goddess of marriage and childbirth. It's always been a good month for weddings. After that came Quintilis. Yes, stick with me here. The fifth month was just called Quintilis from quintus, the word for fifth. Then Sextilis from sextus or sixth. Then the seventh month or September from septim or seven. Now you get the idea for the rest. October, the eighth month. November, the ninth month. And finally the 10th month from Decem, December. After that, just a whole bunch of unaffiliated winter days, just waiting it out till we get back to March, which was determined by the spring equinox. Eventually, 2 more months were added to the calendar for this period. Januarius for the two-faced god Janus, and Februarius for Februa, the name of a purification festival held during that time as preparation for spring. The Roman calendar was an inconsistent mess, with extra days having to be stuck in here and there, and sometimes even whole extra months. It's hard to deal with the cycles of the moon and the sun in the same system. But in 46 BC, Julius Caesar introduced a new system, with a pretty consistent year. 365 days, with an extra day added to February every 4 years. This is when Quintilis, the 5th month, was renamed Julius, July, the month of Caesar's birthday. Augustus, the emperor of Rome who came after Caesar, thought this month-naming gig was a fine idea, and so Sextilis became Augustus, August, for him. The fashion for month-naming ended there, so from September on we were left with the old numbered system. But because the beginning of the year was moved from March to January, the numbers didn't fit anymore. The 7th month became the 9th month, and the 10th a 12th. Everyone was used to the names, though, and figuring out this whole day-counting thing was hard enough, so the names stayed.
The book of the courses of the luminaries of the heaven, the relations of each according to their classes, their dominion, and their seasons, according to their names and places of origin, and according to their months, which Uriel, the holy angel who is with me, who is their guide, showed me. And he showed me all their laws, exactly as they are, and how it is regard to all the years of the world until eternity, till the new creation is accomplished, which dures till eternity. And this is the first law of the luminaries. The luminary, the sun, has its rising in the eastern portal of the heaven and its setting in the western portal of the heaven. And I saw 6 portals in which the sun rises and 6 portals in which the sun sets. And the moon rises and sets in these portals, and the leaders of these stars and those whom they lead, 6 in the east, 6 in the west, and all following each other in accurately corresponding order. Also, many windows to the right and to the left of these portals. Now, pause. That was probably like a lot of like, what? So I want to just real quickly, I'm going to share how I understand what we just read. Now, it is going to have it does going to have an allusion to biblical cosmology and flat Earth, but how the sun and moon, how they come out of their gates. I'm going to show the gates in a second. I just want to share that everything I'm sharing can be applied to the the ball. Okay, so this is what I wanted to share. It's probably hard for some of you to see. So this is what I understand the gates. Can we get this up there? I don't know if that's hard. But this is, I'm going to walk around. This is how I understand. We're about to read the different gates. Yeah. Hang on. And again, this is not, I'm not sharing this for any kind of cosmology debate. It's just how I understand what we're reading. When we're about to read how the sun goes through different gates and different stations. And I think we need a visual for it to make sense, yes?
Okay, who done it? Who changed the calendar in Israel? We can follow Israel into captivity into Babylon, but we do not find them keeping those calendars, but maintaining their own afterwards. In fact, the Babylonian month, Nisan, the first month equated to Abib, basically, and replaced on the modern so-called Hebrew calendar in fraud today, is only used in Scripture to refer to the reign of kings of Persia after Babylon, and that is appropriate there. It does not, however, change the Bible calendar, nor did it. Torah sets that as Moses called the first month Abib, not Nisan, which is Babylonian nonsense. And anyone using Nisan really truly is not following the Bible. The Babylonian practice is what they follow. The prophet Ezra is very clear they restored the Bible and its calendar. Yes, the Bible comes with a calendar, folks.
Okay, so I'll get that back up in a second, the visual. Let's get back to the reading. I wanted to pause there real quickly. We're on verse 4, at least, with the R.H. Charles. And first there goes forth the great luminary named the sun, and his circumference is like the circumference of heaven, and he is quite filled with illuminating and heating fire. The chariot on which he ascends, the wind drives, and the sun goes down from the heaven and returns through the north in order to reach the east, and so it is guided that he comes to the appropriate portal and shines in the face of heaven. Now, that is what we just read right here is he described the movements of the luminaries right here, and this is what he described. Again, this is not a perfect depiction here, but he's describing how it goes in a circular motion. Yes. So this is how I understand what we just read, of how it basically it goes from the north and then it makes a revolution. You see the same thing in Psalm 19, that the sun is like a bridegroom coming out of his chambers to run a race, and he goes on his circuit. Circuit is something where you start and end, or you end at your starting points. And so this is how I understand how the sun moves. Again, just the sun, right? The sun over and over and over and doing its courses over and over again without fail. Square? I don't know. I don't know how to do the square. Yeah. So, okay. I wanted to just give a visual for what we just read about how it goes and makes its circumference, right? So verse 6. In this way, he rises in the first month in the great portal, which is the fourth. Now, this is a key verse. This tells us that the sun has to be in the fourth portal or the fourth gate in order for the calendar to be in the first month.
See, that's engraved on the heavenly tablets, not just some dude who chose a calendar one day, or especially some rabbi who can't get it right anyway. They never do. They're horribly off, and they have to be, by their own doctrine, right? They're not allowed to teach you and I anything. Enoch will agree, you will see coming soon. If we change the calendar, we disrupt and profane his feasts and Sabbaths. And yet they are corrupting every week of every year today, folks, and really every day. But where did all of this come from? First, by observing the moon instead of the sun as the measure. Jubilees, and you are about to see Enoch very soon, coming very soon. Rebuke the use of the moon as the measure of the start of the day, etc. The Bible does not use the moon as that measure. Yes, it does serve a purpose, but it is not for the start of the day, the week, the month, the year, the Sabbath of years, the Jubilee, or even the seasons. So, okay, that's a lot. But again, it does have a purpose, of course. Now, we've well proven this, even the word month, inserted in fraud many times, to change the calendar, is moon instead of month. It should be month many of those times. And so people looking at it and saying, oh, well, the new moon No, the month does. The new month does, not the new moon. And this is an extensive study that we probably will do a video on at some point. Yes, they even change the Bible. Imagine that. Yes, we've caught them many times. The couple of feasts that start in the evening are evening-driven events, not calendar changes, nor could they be, especially when the rest all begin at sunrise. I mean, there's 7 feasts, so we're talking 2, sort of 3, that have an evening start. And then, well, the others all start at sunrise. So how do we overlook, the full picture? Well, that's pretty much what many are trained to do. We're trained to read in fragments.
This tells us that the sun has to be in the 4th portal or the 4th gate in order for the calendar to be in the 1st month. That's what we can discern from this. Here, let me show. And so I want to show you guys these portals here. Yeah. Much better. Okay. So what we just read is for the 1st month to take place, the sun has to be in the 4th gate. See this 4th right here? Can you guys see this pretty good? Now, what this is this is the equator. So anytime it's the spring or fall starts, that's when the sun enters in either the fall or the spring equinoxes. And so what Enoch is telling us, for the 1st month to happen, the sun has to have crossed the equator, has to have crossed the equinox. And then only then can the 1st month begin. Now, but there's more to it if we keep reading. So, so going back to the scriptures here, it was, where were we? Here we go, verse 6. Verse 6, in this way he rises in the 1st month in the great portal, which is the 4th. And so again, that's what we're looking at here is the 4th portal. So that's your spring equinox. So basically, in our modern day terms, the sun has to have crossed the equinox for it to be the 1st month. So let's keep reading. Verse 7, and in that 4th portal from which the sun rises in the 1st month are 12 window openings, from which proceed a flame when they are opened in their season. When the sun rises in the heaven, he comes forth through that 4th portal 30 mornings in succession and sets accurately in the 4th portal in the west of heaven. And during this period, the day becomes daily longer and night nightly shorter in the 30th morning. So what does that mean? And this is what we experience. When the sun crosses the equator every night, right? Every day, the day gets longer and longer. That's right. The sun rises a little bit earlier, right? And it sets a little bit later. We get more sun each day. Why? At least from the understanding of the cosmology I have, is, so you see, this is the fourth portal right here. So it's, as it moves from spring to summer, the sun is moving towards the 5th and the 6th portals. So what happens is the sun gets closer to us. And when the sun gets closer to us, there's more of that sun shining on us. That's why we have longer days, The sun rises earlier and it sets later. Now, conversely, so this right here, 6 represents the summer solstice. When the sun crosses into here, that means the sun is now in its summer months. It stays in here twice, and then it'll come back out here. And then you have fall, right? And then you start getting into the winter. And in winter months, it stays for 60 days in this 1st portal. So what happens is, so we're right here, right? We're here in North America. As the sun goes further out, that's why our nights get longer and the days get shorter. And then when it's all the way out here, this is part of that December 21st summer solstice, or I'm sorry, the winter solstice. Remember, the sun is at the lowest point, at least from this map perspective. It's because the sun is making the longest journey all the way around, and it's further away. Does that make sense? Okay. So, all right, so verse 9. And so during this period, the day becomes daily longer, right? Because it's coming closer. It's getting summer, and that sun is getting closer to us. And nightly shorter to the 30th morning. On that day, the day is longer than night by a 9th part. And the day amounts exactly to 10 parts, and the night to 8 parts. And the sun rises from that portal and sets in the 4th and returns to the 5th portal 30 mornings. So what we just read is, it goes from the 4th, and now it just moved into the 5th. And I'm not going to read all this, but basically, Enoch is going to detail it going from spring, coming into the summer months, and then going back out to fall, because when the sun goes back here, it's in the same position, right? And then it's going back out into the 3rd portal, then the 2nd, and the 1st. And that's going to basically and then it's going to come back to the 4th, and then your year starts. So 4th portal, 5th, 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, then it goes back to 2nd, 3rd, 4th. And it's just this cycle that goes back and forth and back and forth. And if you ever look at the time lapse of the sun, and it does that loop over and over and over again. And so I'm going to skip this. This is basically just detailing how the days get longer, days get shorter, which portal it's in. This is describing the travels of the sun for an entire year, which I just described. And how it goes through the portals. Let me just see here. So here, verse 23, at least in the R.H. Charles. And the sun rises from that 3rd portal and sets in the 3rd portal in the west and returns to the east, and for 30 mornings rises in the 2nd portal in the east, and in like manner sets in the 2nd portal in the west of heaven. And on that day, the night amounts to 11 parts, and the day to 7 parts. And the sun rises on that day from the 2nd portal and sets in the west in the 2nd portal and returns to the east to the 1st portal. So this is just continuing to describe how it just moves from portal to portal, or the different circuits, the different circular circuits here. Still going? Okay. And so, yeah. And so anyways, I'm not going to read all that. It's basically just detailing each month. And so verse 32, on that day, the night decreases and amounts to 9 parts, and the day to 9 parts, and the night is equal to the day, and the year is exactly to its days 364. And the length of the day and of the night, and the shortness of the day and of the night arise. Through the course of the sun, these distinctions are made, i.e., they are separated. Okay. And let's just go down to verse 37. Last verse there. As he rises, so he sets and decreases not and rests not, but runs day and night, and his light is 7-fold brighter than that of the sun. But as regards to size, they are both equal, which is
Now, the answer to this thorny question has been the same for almost every culture who has tackled it. Just add some more days. The practice of adding these intercalary days began as far back as the Egyptians, who in 239 BCE adopted a calendar of 12 30-day months with 5 extra days, plus a 6th every 4 years. Turns out that whole leap year thing is a pretty ancient idea. And over time, different cultures chose different ways to add these extra days. Many of them would group them together, such as the Chinese 4-quarter calendar that inserted an extra 10-day week in certain summers, and the Buddhist calendar that adds an extra 30-day month every few years. The ancient Romans would occasionally add an extra month between February and March, creating a year that would last 22 extra days. This also created an interesting way for Roman politicians to abuse their power, however. Since their terms of office lasted for a calendar year, they could just elect to give themselves more time in office by extending the year.
2020 is a leap year. That means there's an extra day in the calendar, the 29th of February. But why do we have leap years? And how do we decide when to have them? The answer is a little more complicated than you may think, so here's how it works. We measure a day as how long it takes the Earth to spin once on its own axis. That's 24 hours. And we measure a calendar year as how long it takes the Earth to orbit the Sun. 365 days.
Something which the Egyptians realized pretty quickly, considering Ptolemy III was already recommending adding a leap day every 4 years in 238 BC. But Egyptians are nothing if not stubborn. Jump forward 12 Ptolemies and 200 years, and Egypt still hadn't adopted the leap year, until Julius Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, you may know him as Augustus, decided enough was enough. He just conquered Egypt and forced them to have a leap day every 4 years. In 46 BC, Julius Caesar gathered the best living philosophers and mathematicians in order to reform the Roman lunar calendar into an Egyptian-style solar calendar. Ultimately, they ended up just agreeing with Ptolemy III and determined that the year should be 365 days long, and every 4 years an extra day should be added. In order to actually achieve this reform, Caesar added an extra 67 days to that year and called it the last year of confusion. But everyone else just called it the year of confusion. Luckily for us, though, they were mostly right about the length of the year, and the calendar now drifted by only a single day every 134 years. But for some popes, a single day every 134 years isn't accurate enough. Before it can be understood why Pope Gregory XIII decided to change the calendar yet again, a few things have to be understood about calendar systems in general and about determining the date of Easter in particular. First, let's talk a bit about calendar systems. There are 3 major kinds of calendars. I've already mentioned 2 of them: solar calendars, lunar calendars, and lunisolar calendars. Our calendar ultimately is a solar calendar that grew out of a lunar one. Strangely enough, that is why we even have months, which at one point would have followed the cycles of the moon. And even still, in the Catholic Church, there's a lunar calendar built into the Gregorian calendar, but it only really exists to determine the date of Easter. The way Easter's date is determined is boring, complicated, and the date will differ depending on whether you live in the Western or Eastern world. To simplify, the date of Easter had drifted by over a week in Pope Gregory XIII's time, and soon it would move out of spring and into summer. This really annoyed the Pope, and revealed the small inaccuracy present in the Julian calendar.
The flat earth theory seems to be making a bit of a comeback in pop culture recently, thanks to the internet's ability to lend a megaphone to just about anyone. I'm sure we've all looked on with varying degrees of amused fascination. However, as the trend grows larger, I'm sure that at some point, the laughter has turned to a nervous chuckle. I can't really believe this, right? At the same time, perhaps some of us have even begun to reflect on things. Hang on a sec, how do we know the shape of the Earth? Well, I'm happy to let scientists share our best answers from the 21st century. In this video, we'll be taking a look at how our ancestors from millennia ago answered this question. We will begin by investigating what the historical and archaeological record can tell us about what people in the past thought of the world. Some of our earliest evidence can be found in ancient Mesopotamian imagery. As might be expected, these propose varying forms of a flat Earth model. For example, Sumerian and Babylonian depictions portray the Earth as a flat disk, ringed by mountains, floating on the ocean with the hemispherical skyvault resting upon the summits. This roof was punctured by small holes through which one could see the celestial fires of heaven. The pyramid texts of ancient Egypt, which date to the Old Kingdom, demonstrate a similar flat Earth model, with a planar body surrounded by eternal seas. It appears that concepts of this early model would also leave a record in the religious ideas of the time. For instance, the Babylonians would posit that the Earth must not only be flat, but also hollow, in order to provide space for their underworld. The Abrahamic religions also contain many references to their early flat Earth belief. Here are some common examples from the Bible. He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy, and spreads them out like a tent to live in. For he views the ends of the earth, and sees everything under the heavens. He marks out the horizon of the face of the waters for a boundary between light and darkness. And finally, in Revelations, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, to prevent any wind from blowing on the land, or on the sea, or on any tree. These descriptions seem quite similar to the Babylonian belief we have discussed. While there is certainly room to take the religious descriptions as more metaphorical than literal, it is clear that the imagery here drew quite heavily on a flat earth model that must have at some point circulated through the culture. And while such descriptions of the shape of the earth would continue to live on in various forms, it wasn't long before humans caught on to the error of their ways. Let's now take a look at how they did so.
Columbo, the world she's flat. The world she's round. She's flat. Look, King, she's round like the apple. She's flat like the pancake. Pasta fazoon. She's round, she's firm, she's fully packed. She's round like my head. She's flat like your head. Biscuit tortone. Yeah. What's up, docs? I'm a disgust. Nobody believes the world she's around. She looks around to me, Doc.
But before we start, I must state that it will be very difficult to speak definitively about what people in the past thought about a given subject, at least in the general sense. The historical record is often incomplete, and when we do have data, it often favors the elite over the common folks. As we proceed, I will largely be focusing on the former of these two groups, and using them as a weather vane for the beliefs of the time. That being said, I do want to state that there are a variety of practical ways that anyone throughout the ages could have come to their own understanding of the curvature of the Earth without requiring scientific advancement. Here are some simple methods of direct observation. One of the best test environments would be near bodies of water, where an observer could look out over a large, level surface and compare what they saw with expectations from a flat versus a spherical Earth model. Ships sailing over the horizon are a great example. A flat Earth model would have them disappear uniformly, while a round Earth model would see their topsails disappear last. The latter proved true. In the reverse fashion, a ship approaching from sea will first observe the tallest objects on land. Another variant on this would be to attempt to observe a distant object like a lighthouse from ground level, or from a tall tower or mountain. As would be expected with the round Earth, the greater elevation reveals objects further on the horizon and behind the curvature. Another common method would be to look up at the night sky. It was quickly observed by travelers that moving north or south had a rather drastic impact on what was visible. In some cases, objects like the pole star would have moved to a different elevation, while other stars might even be obscured entirely. A bit closer to home, one could look at the Earth's shadow on the moon. The projection of a flat Earth would be expected to cast an elliptical shadow, while a round Earth would cast a circular shadow.
Until the 16th century, geocentrism was the prevailing theory of what the universe looked like. Geocentrism is the belief that the Earth, our home planet, is at the centre of the universe. Everything else revolves around us. This seemed obvious to ancient astronomers. After all, they observed the sun and the moon, the planets and the stars, to move across the sky as we go forward through time, just like we do today. So this must mean that the Earth is in the centre of it all, right? Wrong. The earliest geocentric models of ancient Greek philosophers / scientists / general all-rounders such as Plato and Aristotle in the 4th century BC placed a stationary Earth at the centre, with the planets and the stars moving around us on circles or spheres. The thing is, the simple geocentric model couldn't quite explain all that we see when we watch the skies. For a start, the planets change brightness, which shouldn't happen if they're always the same distance from the Earth. Second, the paths of Mars and Jupiter through the sky sometimes appear to go backwards for a time, which shouldn't happen if they're travelling around on these neat little circles. Despite this, the theory had such a hold, and astronomers were so convinced by it, that they spent hundreds of years making all sorts of modifications to try and make the general theory fit. And as needlessly complicated as it now seems to modern astronomers, this version of the universe proposed by Ptolemy in the 2nd century was almost universally accepted for hundreds of years, but not everyone was happy. As far back as the 3rd century BC, Aristarchus of Samos had suggested that the sun was in the centre of the universe. And in the years that followed Ptolemy's work, both European and Islamic scientists started to question aspects of his geocentric model. Finally, in the 16th century, Polish astronomer Copernicus published his model of the universe, which also put the sun, not the Earth, at the centre of it all. This is known as heliocentrism, and for the first time, mainstream science took note. Today we know that even heliocentrism doesn't tell the full story. While the sun may be at the centre of our solar system, it is just one of over 100 billion stars in our Milky Way galaxy, which is itself one of over 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe. Not only do we have to contend with being just one of probably countless planets out there, modern cosmology tells us that the Earth in our solar system doesn't even occupy a special place in the universe. And in fact, it turns out that there is no centre to this universe at all. Rest in peace, geocentrism.
In February and March of 1616, the Catholic Church issued a prohibition against the Copernican theory of the Earth's motion. This led later, in 1633, to the Inquisition trial and condemnation of Galileo Galilei as a suspected heretic, which generated a controversy that continues to our day. Do these church actions prove the incompatibility between science and religion? What lessons can be learned from the thought and actions of Galileo, who became the father of modern science? In 1543, Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus published On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. This book elaborated the geokinetic and heliocentric idea that the Earth rotates daily on its own axis and revolves yearly around the sun. Since antiquity, this idea had been considered, but rejected in favor of the traditional geostatic and geocentric thesis that the Earth stands still at the center of the universe. The objections to the geokinetic and heliocentric idea involved astronomical observations, the physics of motion, biblical passages, and epistemological principles, for example, the reliability of human senses, which reveal a stationary Earth. Copernicus did not really refute these objections, but he elaborated a novel and important astronomical argument. As a result, Copernicanism attracted few followers. At first, Galileo himself was not one of them, although he was interested because his new physics enabled him to answer the mechanical objections. However, the situation changed with the astronomical discoveries Galileo made in 1609 to 1612 by means of the newly invented telescope. Discoveries that included mountains on the moon, satellites around Jupiter, phases exhibited by Venus, and sunspots. These discoveries did not conclusively prove Copernicanism, but provided new evidence in its favor and refutations of some old objections. Galileo became more explicit in his pursuit of heliocentrism, and this soon got him into trouble. In February-March 1615, one Dominican friar filed a written complaint against him, and another one testified in person in front of the Roman Inquisition. They accused Galileo of heresy for believing in the Earth's motion, which contradicted Scripture. For example, the miracle in Joshua, chapter 10, verses 12 to 13. The Inquisition launched an investigation. Galileo's writings were evaluated and other witnesses interrogated. The charges against Galileo were unsubstantiated. However, the officials started worrying about the status of heliocentrism and consulted a committee of experts. On February 24, 1616, the consultants unanimously reported the assessment that heliocentrism was philosophically false and theologically heretical, or at least erroneous. The following day, the Inquisition, presided by Pope Paul V, considered the case. Although it did not endorse the heresy recommendation, it accepted the judgments of scientific falsity and theological error, and decided to prohibit the theory. Thus, on February 26, 1616, the Inquisition's most authoritative cardinal, Robert Bellarmine, met with Galileo in private and gave him the following warning. The Church was going to declare the idea of the Earth's motion false and contrary to Scripture, and so this theory could not be held or defended. Galileo agreed to comply. On March 5th, a decree was issued by the Index, the department charged with book censorship. Without mentioning Galileo, it publicly declared the Earth's motion false and contrary to Scripture. It prohibited the reading of Copernicus's revolutions, and it banned a book published in 1615 by Paolo Antonio Foscarini, in which the author had argued that the Earth's motion was probably true and certainly compatible with Scripture. The 1616 condemnation of Copernicanism was bad enough for the relationship between science and religion, but the problems were compounded by Galileo's trial 17 years later. Galileo kept quiet until 1623, when a new pope was elected, Urban VIII, who was a great admirer of Galileo. He then started working on a critical examination of all scientific and philosophical arguments on both sides, and in 1632, Galileo published Dialogue on the two chief world systems, Ptolemaic and Copernican. The arguments for the Copernican side turned out to be stronger than those for the Ptolemaic geostatic side. They were not conclusive, but showed that the Earth's motion was probably true. This book was a reasonable, clever, and indirect attempt to circumvent the 1616 prohibitions. Unfortunately, Galileo did not succeed. The Inquisition summoned him to Rome, and the trial proceedings lasted from April to June 1633. He was found guilty of suspected heresy for defending the Earth's motion, and thus denying the authority of Scripture. Suspected heresy was not as serious a religious crime as formal heresy, and so his punishment was not death by being burned at the stake, but rather house arrest and the banning of the dialogue. The original controversy ended then, but a new one began about the facts, causes, responsibilities, and lessons of the original one. The Church's condemnation of Copernicanism and Galileo became the iconic illustration of the problematic relationship between science and religion. The past 4 centuries have also witnessed a series of attempts by the Church to undo its original actions. These include the partial unbanning of Galileo's dialogue and Copernican books in general by Pope Benedict XIV in 1740 to 1758. The total repeal of the prohibition of Copernicanism in 1820 to 1835. The implicit theological vindication of Galileo's biblical hermeneutics by Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Providentissimus Deus in 1893. And the partial, informal, and ambiguous rehabilitation of Galileo by Pope John Paul II in 1979 to 1992. This controversy will probably not end anytime soon. This may be seen from Pope Francis's 2015 encyclical, Laudato Si, with its focus on climate change. Whatever its merits, it could be criticized for having failed to learn from the Galileo affair the lesson that the Church should be wary of interfering in scientific matters.